What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and in this video, I'm going to be ranking all 16 of the Ghostface killers across the entire Scream franchise in a tier list. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel for even more Scream-related content. And if you'd like to follow along with your own ranking, I have put the link to this template in the descriptions down below for you to enjoy. But otherwise, let's get into it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is go in order of reveal throughout all of the movies. So we'll start with Billy. You know, he kind of walks this tightrope. He's just as equally suspicious as he is, you know, kind of this supportive boyfriend. So the fact that he's able to skillfully keep us guessing, you know, every step of the way is definitely a testament to, you know, his ability as the killer. But with Billy, he really puts himself on the front line, which is something that a lot of the killers don't really do. Like, he puts himself at risk of getting caught so many times and still gets away with it. I'd also say that, you know, and this is almost more of a pairing with Stu, is that these two are like the only ones who really have a reverence towards the horror genre. You know, you have the characters, you know, in the newer ones like Amber and Richie, and they're all about stab. Same with Charlie in Scream 4. So while they are technically horror fans, their fandom is, you know, relegated to just the stab franchise, whereas Billy and Stu were the ones that actually, you know, did a little bit of homework. They watched a lot of movies, they took notes, and that, I feel, made them way more creative as killers. I'd also say with Billy, he might be one of the more dangerous killers of this entire list. There's this aspect to him that just feels like he would stop at nothing to complete his goal. But I think that one of the strongest aspects of Billy as the killer is that he is one of only a few who is actually able to get under Sydney's skin and able to manipulate her in a way that is very personal to their relationship. You know, obviously he's seduced her. He's the first person that Sydney ever slept with, and that's quite a betrayal for her to only a few hours later find out that he's the killer and he also killed her mother. That is pretty hardcore. So this would probably come as no surprise, but Billy is going in the S tier. Would I say the same for Stu? The thing with Stu, and a lot of this comes down to Matthew Lillard and his performance, and not to, you know, undersell Skeet Ulrich's performance, because there's a lot of duality to what he is doing. But with Matthew, he took a character that was very basic on the script and really infused this enormous personality into him. And I think what is great with Stu is that when the mask comes off or when he reveals himself, he doesn't change who he is. Like, there's an energy shift for sure, but it's the same personality all the way through. And I know that, like, some of the later killers, it feels that the mask comes off and then they try to emulate Stu in a way. There's just like this heightened craziness. So Stu, in a way, has become this template for killers moving forward, and nobody quite captures it like Matthew does, especially with like the physicality of it and just like the slobbering and spitting and all that, and of course the improv and all of the lines ad-libbed on the day. Stu really feels like a real character. Like, I know this guy. I've met this guy before, gone to school with him. And even though he can be very charming and is even reduced to kind of this like crybaby, there is something that feels very real and kind of creepy about his motivation of peer pressure. Like, this is something that I feel is very much based in the real world. It's always been very hard for me to separate Billy and Stu from one another just in terms of a ranking, because they really do go together as a pair. Just in terms of the killers maybe getting away with it, hypothetically, they might have had a better chance, at least, you know, in comparison to a lot of the later ones. But they really are a dynamic duo. And I think that Stu in particular, you know, what he is he just brings so much character to this movie. A lot of the other killers are just sort of there, but Stu makes an impression. So I would also put him in the S tier just because I don't want to separate them, and I can't, but I would probably put him under Billy. Now, next up is Mickey, and I've actually heard a lot of people criticize Mickey for just being another Stu or like a Stu 2.0, and I could not disagree anymore. Mickey, to me, is unique because he has the most fantastical, far-fetched motive of any of the killers. Especially when you look at it during the time of when this movie came out, when the O.J. Simpson trial was such a huge cultural thing. The biggest complaint, I hear is that Mickey disappears for 45 minutes. He's not in any scenes after the cafeteria until he's revealed at the end. And that's never really bothered me. And I think that's because Wes Craven really front-loaded Mickey into the movie. He appears quite a bit early on, and Mickey is probably the most theatrical of any of the killers. That's what I really love about him. And his monologue is, one that I routinely quote. Timothy Olyphant is certainly chewing up the scenery, especially during his reveal. But the thing is, he makes such a huge impression. And him and Mrs. Loomis are kind of, segregated from each other because they don't really present themselves as a team. So he has 2, maybe 3 minutes to get his whole spiel out. And it's such an effective bit because Mickey is able to psychologically manipulate Sydney like no other killer has been able to do. Not only does he have her doubting Derek, but then he completely breaks down her ability to trust anyone. And this is kind of a huge turning point for Sydney in the franchise, because after this, she goes into hiding for several years. That is really going to mess a person up to doubt their loved one and then watch as they die 2 seconds later. Wes Craven actually, on the Scream 2 commentary, described Mickey as being this homage to the character Iago from Shakespeare's Othello. So I think the fact that Mickey kind of has those accolades really is a testament to how good of a killer he is. I just think that Mickey is such a great combination of fun and dangerous. So he's also going in S tier, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but he is going at the top here. With Mrs. Loomis, aka Nancy Loomis, aka Debbie Salt, the thing that I love the most about her is, firstly, female killers are just always so much more interesting to me than the male ones. I don't know why, I can't explain it. But with her in particular, what I really appreciate is the multi-layered reveal, because not only do we have this hidden in plain sight character as just this kind of pesky reporter who's been hanging around all throughout the movie, but as it also happens, she is Billy's mother. So it's almost like a double whammy when she appears. She's also not a character that has a whole lot of screen time, but she's still a character that makes an impression every time she's on screen. And I think that she appears in the movie consistently enough that you never forget about her, but at the same time, you're never really suspecting her. You can't, possibly conceive her as being one of the killers. But similar to Mickey, she also is a very theatrical villain. We're on this stage. This is sort of like this Greek tragedy with the whole Cassandra play and everything. And you have Mrs. Loomis, this scorned woman who's out for revenge against the woman who killed her child. There's such high drama to the stakes here. It's just something that I feel is done best with Mrs. Loomis. The motive of revenge is such a personal one, and I always appreciate when the motive is personal. And this transcends beyond a performance for Laurie Metcalf. She is giving us a soliloquy. Her physicality is also off the charts. She's doing all this stuff with her neck. She kind of reminds me of a Pez dispenser. And of course, the big bugged out eyes. This is just top tier stuff. This is going in S for me. I would probably put her above Billy and Stu, but just below Mickey. Here's the thing, the Scream 2 killers, they are just so much more interesting to me because of their motives. With the first movie, I love everything that Billy and Stu are doing, but there is a very traditional aspect to it. So I think that Scream 2 really goes for it. And I just really love these two as a pair, because even though we don't get to see them interact very much, there's enough breadcrumbs that are planted throughout to kind of give you an idea of what their relationship is, how she was able to find him and, what their dynamic might have been like behind the scenes. And that's like one of my favorite things, is just imagining what the killers do and say, you know, when we're seeing everything else. Now, next up we have Roman Bridger, our soloist Ghostface killer. With every other killer, it seems like the reveal kind of presents itself because like the clock has run out, or, you know, the heroes have been backed into a corner, or the killers have, or whatever. But Roman is the only one that like really has everything staged, if you think about it. His dedication to the pageantry of the reveal, like he had a projector with this movie, he had like the voice of the mom and the burlap sack. I can actually imagine him rehearsing this monologue in the mirror for the past 4 years. So he definitely deserves points for being able to pull that off. But I think the problem that I had with Roman, and still do, is the fact that he doesn't actually have any screen time with Sydney throughout the movie. The first time they meet is when he takes off the mask, and she is just as confused as all of us. Like, who is this guy? Am I supposed to know him? Even in terms of Gale and Dewey, he barely interacts with them either. He's just kind of like the Stab 3 director. That's all we really know him as. He's interacting with more so the other peripheral characters. And, you know, when I compare that to, you know, more of the hidden in plain sight aspects of Mrs. Loomis in Scream 2, and, you know, even Mickey to a certain extent, because he's not featured that much, all of their scenes are still them interacting with, you know, either Sydney or Gale. So we do get this sense of betrayal at the end, and that's something that we don't really get with Roman. So because there was sort of this disconnect between him and Sydney, you know, it left me wanting for more. And I like that Sydney actually calls Roman out for his crap, because that actually allows us to see how fragile his ego and psyche are. You know, for all intents and purposes, Roman is kind of a walking contradiction. You know, he expresses jealousy over Sydney's life, but, you know, he's got it pretty good. He's a Hollywood director. So while that has been an aspect to Roman that has always been a bit perplexing to me, I like the fact that she's able to rile him up and we're able to kind of get that out of him. It's not the case of a two-dimensional stock villain here, which, you know, could have been the case with this whole lost brother backstory. There's also the fact that Roman is probably Sydney's most formidable foe when it comes to a physical threat, because she usually had like a pretty easy time defeating, you know, all the other people. Roman really gave her a run for her money, and I mean, if it was not for the bulletproof vest and all that, like, he might have got her, but he's a very smart killer. I think that he's very highly intellectual. And I think that all of the killers up to this point have been very intellectual, but I would put Roman in the A tier just for the fact that we didn't get to see any sort of interaction with Sydney throughout the movie. I think that's the one thing that's probably hurting him the most for me. But then we have Charlie Walker, and Charlie is another one that I've kind of reevaluated, especially with the advent of, you know, the newer killers. You know, Charlie always used to be one of the worst ones for me. But the thing that does make Charlie interesting and a much more dimensionalized killer is when you really take a look at, you know, whatever the arrangement is between Jill and Charlie. He was doing all of the grunt work, and his motivation for doing that was Jill. One of my biggest gripes for a lot of the newer killers is that I don't understand or believe whatever their reason is for being the killer. But with Charlie, he's presented very clearly and effectively, and surprisingly has a lot of emotional nuance. So, you know, one misconception that I've heard a lot for Charlie is that he's kind of this incel teenager character who despises women. But to me, that just seems like a very reductive way of analyzing his character, because he's actually a lot more complex than he gets credit for. And not that I feel sorry for Charlie, but, you know, when you think of it, he actually is a victim to this like horrible narcissist who has been grossly manipulating him all throughout the movie by promising him, you know, whatever their arrangement is. And for Charlie, he's kind of convinced himself that that's love. or that's like the path to a relationship between them. And, you know, even though that all kind of makes him a simp, it still gives him a lot of depth of character because his ultimate reward is receiving affection. And even though he's presented as this stab fanatic, there is this tragic element to him. And I think we especially see that when he has to betray Carvey, because this is someone who could offer him exactly the same thing that Jill is promising, only without all the murder. And at the end of the day, I appreciate when a Ghostface killer is human and their goals and purpose is actually comprehensible to me. So I'm gonna put Charlie probably in B. You know, he's not great, but, you know, I think that he deserves a lot more credit than what he usually gets. But that'll bring us to Jill, and I mean, Jill probably has, you know, the most outrageous storyline trajectory just in terms of this narcissistic obsession with fame and influencer culture that didn't even exist yet in 2011. She was really ahead of her time. So I think that just by that very nature alone makes her also a very intellectual killer. And I mean, she's just so outrageous. The self-mutilation, there's something so triumphant about it to the point where you kind of want her to get away with it. I am actually more invested in Jill than I am worried about Sydney's health. Laying on the floor bleeding out. And that is a true testament to how interesting Jill is as a character. Unfortunately with Jill, I think that the edit of the movie hurts her a little bit just because there were so many scenes cut out that gave us more of an impression of who she was, or just sort of like allowed us to see more of the manipulation. My favorite aspect of her though is just how messy she is. I know a lot of people say that Jill is the only killer that would have gotten away with it, or is like the one killer that was the closest to get away with it. I disagree completely. I think that it was very clear that Jill was not going to go very far with her plan. Once she got to the hospital and all of her lies started catching up with her, I always relate this back to that episode of South Park where it's discovered that Cartman locked Butters up in a bomb shelter so he could take his place at Kyle's birthday party and go to this theme park restaurant. Only he was discovered at the very last minute when they were about to go in, and rather than just sort of like taking his punishment, he had to do this speed run through everything just so he could experience the thrill of what he had been working so hard to achieve. And that is like everything that Jill is in that final hospital scene. Like, she knows that she's not getting away with it, but this is a killer that I can't take seriously. But that is something that I love so much about her. Another thing that I like is that she sort of represents the darker side of Sydney. And, you know, that's just a dichotomy that I really find fascinating in movies and literature and stuff, when you have this foil to your hero character that is just represents everything that is evil about them. So I think that I would put Jill in the A tier. I'm going to put her above Roman. Then we come to Amber Freeman. I think the thing that bothers me the most about Amber is that she really lacks any sort of truth of character. This is like what I was talking about with Stu, where his personality is very consistent all throughout the movie. There's more so an energy shift when he's revealed. When Amber is revealed, she just becomes a completely different person. You know, we spend the entire movie kind of establishing her as this possessive friend to Tara. You know, we hear all about this jealousy and resentment that she has for Sam, but none of that is a through line that makes it into the climax of the movie. So it all feels very incidental, and when she's revealed as the killer, she's suddenly presented as this stab fanatic, which makes sense for Richie, but for Amber, it's just very sudden. It feels kind of convenient and shoehorned in. If Amber's motivation is aligned with Richie's and she's killing for the same cause as him, I would expect that to be threaded throughout the movie. But because her weird obsession connection with Tara is just suddenly abandoned, it makes me question if any of that was real. I just feel like the writers kind of sabotaged her character because they were wanting to have it both ways with her. At least with Charlie, he was presented as a stab fanatic, but then he also had an ulterior motive to get with Jill. But here, it just feels very confusing because there's no attempt made to thread any of that together. To me, Amber just feels like she is written and portrayed as a killer who is crazy just for the sake of being crazy. So when she starts getting erratic post-reveal, none of that feels justified. There's just something very forced about it. And it's even more confusing when she starts pleading with Gale and Sydney to spare her while also simultaneously provoking them. And perhaps that's, part of the fun of the character. And she does make an impression with this sort of like frenetic, contradictory behavior. And, I do appreciate a Ghostface killer that can make an impression, but I needed more from her, at least in terms of like understanding her psyche or justifying her motivation beyond, having moved into Stu Macher's house and being fascinated by it. I just felt that it was really lazy. So I would put her in the B tier. I would actually put her below Charlie for the reasons I already stated. But then we get to Richie Kirsch. And I think what's interesting about Richie is that he's a character who suffers from being less emotionally accessible and therefore more cartoonish. And I think that's the main distinction between the Wes Craven killers and the new era killers. Wes made sure that his Ghostfaces had a lot more believability and emotional depth. Whereas, Radio Silence and Guy Busick leaned more into this idea of tropes. And I think that there are some similarities between, say, a character like Richie and Charlie, in a sense that they are both fanatics of the Stab franchise. But with Richie, they just weren't able to create that same level of empathy. So any appreciation that I have for the character is maybe more so based on the performance by Jack Quaid. And I think that's probably one of the highlights here for me because he just makes the character so darn likable. There's kind of this nebbish charm to him that, really does make this feel like it was the best casting choice because it does sting when you find out that he's the killer. Like I was saying with Jill sort of being the dark side of Sydney, I could see an argument being made that Richie is kind of like the dark side of Randy. Ultimately, Richie is the toxic fan, which in and of itself is a very reductive archetype. People have more layers than that. Their love of movies might be an outlet for aggression, but there still needs to be a catalyst. And at the end of the day, Richie makes a really fun villain, but he doesn't feel like a real person. We haven't really been shown like how this will impact his life on a personal level or, really what he's going to get out of that. At least with Jill, she was guaranteed this sort of fame. And with Mickey, he had this satisfaction of beating the system. So while I do thoroughly enjoy Richie and all of his quirks and antics, once he's revealed as the killer, there's not much more depth to explore. So I find that, the scenes with him just start to get very tedious. I still think that Jack Quaid elevates the material, so I would say A tier, but it's going to be below Roman. Then that brings us to Jason Carvey, our opening scene Ghostface killer of Scream 6. I did not include Greg here just because he was not really presented as a character or a Ghostface killer, but I am not a fan of any Ghostface whose entire purpose is contingent towards satisfying the writer's quota for first-time gimmicks, especially when those gimmicks, or plot twists, if you will, are completely incidental and don't do anything to actually drive the narrative forward. So he's one of two killers that kind of fall under this aspect of gimmick Ghostface killers. I will at least say for Jason, he's presented as a character. We get a sense of who he is. He has dialogue. We follow him for a little bit. However, he's still a very two-dimensional character. And this might be a bit of a double-edged sword because I think that, he was intentionally designed to be really bad at being a Ghostface killer, and that's probably part of the joke. Hence his practice practice of stabbing first, then looking to see if anyone noticed later. Jason, just for the very fact that he's kind of this goofy, very not menacing character, it doesn't really do much to enhance my intrigue for the other Ghostface killer who comes in and kills him, because it's not really a challenge for that killer. Had they presented this scenario where Jason was actually like a very skilled Ghostface killer that was on top of his game and then still be taken out by like the better killer, that probably, you know, would have made it more interesting. But I just don't really care about this person because he doesn't have anything to do with anything else. And what's interesting is the seeds were planted there. He's shown to be friends with Tara, and like it's mentioned that he's friends with Sam. But then again, it doesn't really feel like Sam and Tara are all that fussed about Jason and Greg. The more I kind of like break down the aspects of this character, it just feels like poor writing to justify a plot twist for like the shock value. I'm gonna say that Jason is D tier for me. All right, then we have Wayne Bailey, and you know, my biggest problem with Wayne, similar to what I was talking about with Amber, is that he is two different people, even more so than Amber. There is Wayne pre-reveal and then there is Wayne post-reveal. And because of that, it's really hard to find the truth within this character. You know, even like the way that Dermot Mulroney is playing him, I don't believe that Wayne believes his own convictions. The thing is that Dermot Mulroney is actually a fantastic actor, so this doesn't really come down to his performance, it's the way that he was directed. And this has actually come out within the production that Radio Silence wanted him to do takes where he played it bigger and more grandiose, like just the over-the-top ridiculous way that we see. And because of that, it has this very intentional camp element to it. He just comes off way too ridiculous, way too arch villain, and that's not what Ghostface is. That doesn't work for these movies, and I feel like this is a misconception that has kind of plagued the newer era of Scream. So I get that, you know, they probably wanted to direct him to have more fun, and that's not to say that these movies and characters can't be fun, but you also can't force that tone at the expense of authenticity. I also think that the writing leaves a lot to be desired. Wayne has a very long-winded monologue that seems to be sectioned off into several parts, just like it's a very long scene, and he's just saying a lot of the same stuff over and over. I also think that there was a huge missed opportunity here just to have Sam push back a little and, you know, highlight the hypocrisy of the Kirsch family, you know, very similarly to Sam, also being the relatives of a past killer. They're essentially accusing her of being the same thing to Billy that they are to Richie. And there could have been a lot of fun conflict to come out of that discussion. I am more forgiving of Wayne running into Sam and then throwing each other over the railing, even though he was aiming his gun at her the entire time. But the thing that I don't believe would ever happen is him conceding to Sam at the end. Like, she has just, as far as he knows, murdered all of his children, and he's kneeling down there and he's been stabbed 30 times or whatever, and he's pleading for his life. I think that a character like Wayne would probably fight Sam until the bitter end. Like, that guy is way too stubborn to just give up or, you know, like wave the white flag. If I did have to point out a positive with Wayne, though, I'd say that he's probably the most evil of all of the killers, because not only did he raise a killer with Richie, but he also indoctrinated his other children to become killers with him, which is very messed up when you think about it. So that does make him somewhat interesting to me, kind of actually, you know, headcanon, like, who is he? He's clearly not a cop. And that's another thing. I feel like they could have explored his true backstory a little bit more. I think that there was a lot of potential with Wayne, but they just didn't reach the heights of that potential. So Wayne, for me, is gonna go in C tier. Then we have Ethan, and at the very least, I'll give this to Ethan. He displays a sliver of emotional nuance. I feel we get an idea of a child who is living in the shadow of his deceased older brother, who, you know, always gets overlooked and undervalued. And this is not something that is really highlighted very much at all. It's very like subtextual in the writing, like almost to the point where you don't even notice it. So it's possible that I'm reading way too much into that because, you know, it's more so based on the dialogue that Wayne has in the theater and Ethan's insecurities with talking to girls. But, you know, for the most part, Ethan is just kind of there. You know, a lot of people will put stock into screen time. Like, that's why, like, there are people who don't think that Mickey and Mrs. Loomis are good killers because they don't have a lot of screen time. But I think that Ethan is a really good example of why screen time doesn't matter, because he's in this movie a lot. Like, the whole friend group is basically in almost every scene. They go from venue to venue, and we spend a lot of time with Ethan, and I feel like we really don't get much of him at all. He's just hanging out with them. He's continuously adding nothing. He barely says anything. So, you know, I really feel that quantity does not equal quality. I think that I prefer a killer to actually make an impression when they're on screen and then disappear for a long period of time before coming back, rather than having, you know, what we did with Ethan. There's also a lot of loose ends with him. Like, I don't feel that we're given any proper insight into why he would sabotage his own family's plot by rescuing Mindy. Like, I just feel that this is another case of bad writing in order to somehow create a plot twist at the last second by having Ethan pull off his mask, because, like, how could he be there? Because he was at the subway with Mindy and he just saved her. And I also don't understand why he had to have a fake identity. Like, they couldn't know that he was related to Bailey and Quinn. This movie is just doing way too much and nothing at the same time. So with Ethan, I think that I would also put him in C. I would put him below Wayne, but the only reason that he is not going in D is because of that little nugget of emotional nuance. That's it. Then we have Quinn, and I think that Quinn got a really raw deal because I think that she's actually a traditionally well-rounded killer. It's just very unfortunate that she happens to be a killer in Scream 6 because she's sadly overshadowed by being one of 3 killers of the same family. And I think that's another thing that hurts the movie. Having 3 killers just takes too much away from each one of them. I think that 2 is the magic number. I think that that's really a fun opportunity to have 2 people play off of each other. 3 is a crowd. 1 killer is just one too few. But besides that, there are other things that are working against her here. I think that the lack of screen time is definitely one of them. The writing is just a little too on the nose in her scene with Tara, which I feel easily gives her away as the killer. And I think that the reveal that she faked her death, while I do really appreciate the misdirection of it all, they really fumbled the bag by having her be the final reveal. In theory, if her father is already revealed as the killer, followed by Ethan, who is also revealed to be his secret son, the only plausible deduction to make from that point is that the third as of yet unmasked killer would have had to have been Quinn. So if they had just swapped that and had her reveal herself before Wayne came in and turned the gun, and, you know, they could have actually played with that and had him, like, pretend to be betrayed and be like, what, you're still alive? And oh my gosh, you're the killer? You know, at the very least, that still would have recontextualized her death from earlier, but it also would have maintained the purest level of surprise. I will say that I do get a sense of who Quinn is. She's consistent. There's an authenticity to her character, and when she's revealed, it's just the energy that shifts. She doesn't become a whole new person. And she never comes off as over the top in the way that Wayne and Ethan do. Like, her vibe is a lot more controlled and measured, and I find that that subtlety allows her to be creepy and express herself in, you know, a much more nuanced way. So because of that, I do think that Liana Liberato gives a really good performance, to a point where this is a character that I would have liked to see more of. I would have appreciated her have more scenes or be on screen just a little bit more. So I would actually put Quinn in the B tier. And, I'll probably get more heat for this. I think that Quinn is a better killer than Amber. I think that Charlie is more interesting. We get to see more depth with him than Quinn. But, of these two lady killers, I think that Quinn is much better, in my opinion. Okay, so now we get to our Scream 7 killers, and first up is Karl Gibbs. To me, the most unique aspect of a Ghostface killer is their voice, their sense of identity, the behavioral and intellectual traits that provide motivation and make them tick. But when it comes to Karl, not only does he have no voice, he is a complete lack of character. Something like that works for Michael Myers if this is a Halloween movie, but for Scream and Ghostface, this is just a big flop, in my opinion. At most, we can confirm Karl to be behind the mask during the house attack, meaning that the majority of what we see from him is just a singular hive-minded entity that represents all of the Ghostface killers from Scream 7. And then at the very least, we see that he likes to amble about town while leering conspicuously at his target. But even in terms of a backstory, Karl is pretty uninspired, which is all very unfortunate because I think that he is merely the victim of a plot twist that could have been left in the oven for a little bit longer. For instance, let's say that he wasn't killed when Gale ran him down, but rather he was apprehended instead. Give Sidney and the police an opportunity to interrogate Karl in order to get a tease of what the big bad's motivation is, only for that second or third Ghostface to show up and kill him before he's able to divulge any revealing information. If you're familiar with the Scream TV series, that is very similar to something that had happened with one of the killers in that show, but I think that it would have worked very well here because, at the very least, we would have spent some time getting to know Karl in a way that was still unique to the franchise, while also raising the stakes and, giving us, I think even better misdirection than what they were going for. So, with that same mindset as Jason of just a killer kind of being thrust in there for a cheap gimmick, I think that Karl is D tier. I think that he is bottom of the barrel. At least Jason, got to be a character. We got to spend time with him. Karl, really gave us nothing. Speaking of nothing, we also have Marco Davis. I don't know who Marco is. I don't think that Marco knows who Marco is. In all of the other movies, we at least had a secondary killer who expressed some sort of motive that was independent of the main plan, or in the case of the Kirsch family, they were working as a single unit to achieve the same goal. But with Marco, he doesn't seem to embody either of those traits. What even is his relationship with Jessica? That is a question that I feel needed to be answered. He really does feel like a prototypical minion to her, and in a way that does actually bring about the only thing I do like about him, in the sense that we do get to see him bicker with her, over who gets to take credit for what, and, helping her recall the chronology of her monologue. But otherwise, he's just a real letdown. Even his death is not important enough to get the proper amount of attention. It's just a quick 1 second long shot of Sidney shooting him in the head. Even when he unmasks himself, it's he almost knows how disappointing he is. At the very least, Sidney does recognize him from earlier in the movie, unlike Roman, where she never saw him at all. But, even as a killer and just operating behind the scenes and under the radar, he is really bad at this because he made it very easy to suss him out, since he presented a scenario just in terms of Stu being this John Doe that, it either was going to be that Stu was alive or he was the killer, and he was going to have a very difficult time trying to corroborate his story. So I don't know how he would have gotten away with any of this. It really feels like the whole movie was written and then they decided that they needed Jessica to have an accomplice at the end, so they just put him in there and then wrote one extra scene of him earlier in the film. So with Marco, I'm gonna say D tier. And even though I'm very critical of the ghost faces who are merely there as part of a plot twist or gimmick, I'm going through all of this in real time in my head, and I think that I actually prefer Jason over Marco. So I'm gonna put Marco below him. But then that leaves Jessica, Bowden, and, you know, similar to Amber and Wayne Bailey, I do not believe this character's truth. I think, you know, even to a greater extent than those other two. I know it's not an issue with Anna Camp's performance, and even though, you know, it's not my favorite performance, I can at least understand that she was given practically nothing to work with here. So it really comes down to the writing for me, and as far as motives go, hers is probably the most incomprehensible for me to grasp of this entire franchise and every killer. I actually needed this one to be dumbed down for me in order to understand it, but even then, I actually do not believe that this woman would snap. In the real world, we have seen people commit heinous crimes for even less than what this woman may or may not have endured. But I don't think that the writing at any point in the movie conveys effectively why this woman would be obsessed with Sydney, why she would feel betrayed by Sydney, and why she would want to kill her own son. The mania is never hinted at, and it feels very counterfeit when the mask comes off. Like, she's not only failing to convince me of her motivation, and it certainly doesn't feel like Sydney is convinced either, but I question whether Jessica is convinced herself. What is even her plan after she kills Sydney? Why is she threatening to kill Sydney but has a knife to Tatum's neck? What happens next? How does she get away with it if she even can succeed? She's either extremely incompetent and stupid, or she doesn't care enough about her beliefs to execute them properly. I am going to put her in C, just because I feel that Anna Camp does salvage just a modicum of dignity for this character, even though it's not very much, but she's not going above the Baileys for me. If you want to see even more tier lists and rankings, or even just Scream content in general, you can head over to one of these playlists over here. Until next time, thank you for watching. I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.